This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. The storm hit just after we reached the ski lodge. 5 of us had driven up for a weekend trip. Me, Sarah, Mike, Lisa, and Tom. The forecast had mentioned snow, but nothing like this. I stood at the window of our rented cabin, watching the snowflakes whip past in the darkness. The wind howled against the walls. Our phones showed no signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers. "Look," Sarah said, pointing through the glass. "There are lights on the mountain." We all crowded around the window. 3 distinct points of light moved through the darkness, weaving between the trees about halfway up the slope. They glowed yellow-white, like powerful flashlights. "Probably other skiers," Mike said. "Maybe they got caught in the storm." But something about the lights seemed wrong. They moved too smoothly, too purposefully, no bobbing up and down like you'd expect from people walking. Just a steady glide through the trees. "Should we call mountain rescue?" Lisa asked. Tom shook his head. "Phone lines are down too. Storm must have hit the power lines." We watched the lights for another hour. They never moved in a straight line, instead creating complex patterns across the mountainside. Sometimes they'd separate, moving in different directions. Then they'd come back together, forming a triangle that rotated slowly before breaking apart again. "They're getting closer," I said. The lights had started halfway up the mountain. Now they were maybe a quarter mile from our cabin, close enough to see that they weren't flashlights at all. The glow came from something larger, about the size of a basketball, perfect spheres of light that cast no shadows on the snow around them. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" Between the trees, illuminated briefly by one of the lights, stood a figure, perfectly still, just watching our cabin. "There's another one," Mike whispered. A second figure visible in the glow of another light. Then a third, all motionless, all facing our cabin. The lights moved closer. The figures disappeared back into the darkness, but we could feel them watching. The wind died suddenly, leaving an unnatural silence. "We need to close the curtains," Lisa said. "Now." As she reached for the drapes, one of the lights appeared directly outside our window. The glow filled the room with harsh white light. In that instant, I saw our reflections in the glass. 6 reflections. There were only 5 of us in the cabin. I spun around, nothing behind us. When I looked back at the window, the light was gone. The curtains wouldn't close. The cord seemed jammed. Tom grabbed the fabric, trying to pull it manually. It wouldn't budge. The lights began circling the cabin, round and round, picking up speed. The figures moved with them, glimpsed briefly in the glow. Still watching, still silent. A tapping started on the window, light, rhythmic, like fingernails on glass. But there was nothing there when we looked, just swirling snow and those relentless lights. The temperature in the cabin dropped. Our breath came out in white clouds. Frost formed on the inside of the windows, creating patterns that looked almost like writing. "The door," Mike said suddenly. "Did anyone lock the door?" Before we could move, the lights stopped their circular dance. All 3 hung motionless outside different windows. The tapping ceased. In the silence, we heard footsteps in the snow. Slow, deliberate steps approaching the front door. The handle turned. Sarah grabbed a fireplace poker. Tom positioned himself between the door and the rest of us. I felt the cold sweat freezing on my skin. The door swung open. Nothing but darkness and swirling snow. The lights remained at the windows, their glow seeming to pulse now, like heartbeats. A shadow fell across the doorway, a figure darker than the night behind it. It took one step forward, then another. The lights flared blindingly bright. When my vision cleared, the figure was inside the cabin. It looked human, almost human, but something about the proportions was wrong. The arms too long, the head sitting at an impossible angle. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching us with eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. Behind it, two more figures entered, equally wrong in their dimensions, equally silent. The lights floated in through the doorway, positioning themselves above the figures' heads. The glow revealed more details that my mind refused to process. Skin that didn't move right, fingers with too many joints. Sarah swung the fireplace poker. It passed through the nearest figure like smoke. The lights pulsed once, twice. The figures raised their two long arms in unison. The power went out. Total darkness, except for those three glowing spheres. They rose toward the ceiling, spinning faster and faster. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees. The figures became barely visible shadows moving closer to us. Mike found a flashlight, clicked it on. The cabin was empty. The door stood closed and locked. Outside, the storm raged on. No lights, no figures, just wind and snow. We huddled together until dawn. Nobody sleeping, nobody speaking. When the sun rose, the storm had passed. The mountain stood peaceful under fresh snow, but something was different. "The tracks," Lisa said, looking out the window. A single line of footprints led from the trees to our cabin. Perfect tracks, despite the heavy snowfall that should have filled them. They ended at our door, but that wasn't the strangest part. The prints formed a perfect circle around the cabin, a complete loop, starting and ending at the door. Like something had walked into our cabin and then continued walking in a circle, never breaking stride, never leaving. We packed our bags, called for a snowplow to clear the road. Nobody mentioned what we'd seen. As we drove down the mountain, I looked in the rearview mirror. 3 points of light moved between the trees, weaving their complex patterns. Even in broad daylight, they glowed bright enough to see. And walking below them, 3 figures made their way toward the next cabin on the slope. We never went skiing again, canceled our season passes, found other winter hobbies. But sometimes, on snowy nights, I see lights moving outside my bedroom window. And in the morning, there are always footprints in the snow, a perfect circle around my house. They found our cabin empty last week. The rental company called, asked if we'd taken the keys, said the door was locked, but all our belongings were still inside, exactly as we'd left them. The police report noted only one strange detail, a perfect circle of footprints in the snow around the cabin, and 3 sets of tracks leading from the door up the mountain, where lights are still seen moving through the trees on stormy nights. I got a letter yesterday, no return address. Inside was a photograph of our group from that weekend, all 5 of us standing in front of the cabin, and behind us, barely visible in the shadows, 3 tall figures with 2 long arms. Above their heads, 3 points of light. I burned the photograph, changed my address, moved somewhere it never snows. But last night I heard tapping on my window, 3 rhythmic taps, like fingernails on glass. When I looked outside, there was only darkness. But in that darkness, something moved. Something with arms too long and a head at an impossible angle. And above it, a point of light began to glow. The sound woke me at 3:17 a.m. A low, dragging noise coming from outside, like something heavy being pulled through the snow. I lay in bed listening. My farmhouse sat on 20 acres of empty land. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away. Nobody should have been out there. The noise moved slowly across the field behind my house. a steady rhythm, scrape, pause, scrape, pause, getting closer to my bedroom window. I got up, keeping the lights off. The full moon reflected off the snow, making the night almost as bright as day. The field stretched white and empty to the tree line, empty except for the trail. A wide track cut through the fresh snow, starting at the forest edge. Something had been dragged across my field, leaving a continuous line in the powder. The trail led straight toward my house, but there was nothing making the trail. The scraping sound continued. Scrape, pause, scrape. But I could see the track forming by itself, like an invisible force was plowing through the snow. My breath fogged the window. The temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. I could see frost forming on the inside of the glass. The trail stopped directly below my window. The scraping noise ceased. Then I heard something else, a sound like breathing but wrong, too deep, too slow. It came from right outside, just below the windowsill. I stepped back from the window. My heel caught the edge of the rug. I stumbled, grabbed the dresser for balance. The breathing stopped. Something tapped on the glass. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I ran. Down the stairs, through the kitchen, to the front door. My hands shook as I checked the locks. Deadbolt secure, chain in place. The tapping followed me. 3 knocks on the kitchen window, then the living room window, then the front door. I grabbed my phone. No signal. The landline was dead. The tapping stopped at the front door. The breathing sound returned, louder now. Something scraped against the wood, like claws or nails. I backed away from the door. My flashlight beam showed nothing through the window beside it, just swirling snow and darkness. The door handle turned. Slowly, inch by inch, the lock held. The breathing changed, became faster, more ragged. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ice crystals formed on the windows, spreading like frost flowers. Then the power went out, total darkness. The only sound was that wrong breathing on the other side of the door, and something else, a wet, sliding noise, like meat being dragged across ice. My flashlight beam caught movement outside the window. Something dark moved past, too fast to see clearly, but it left a trail in the snow, a wide, continuous track, like the one in the field. The breathing circled the house, around and around, getting faster. The temperature kept dropping. My own breath came out in white clouds. I ran to the basement, grabbed my shotgun from the gun safe, loaded it with shaking hands. The circle of breathing stopped at the front door again. The handle turned. This time, the lock clicked open. I raised the shotgun, aimed at the door. It swung open slowly. Snow swirled into the house. In the doorway stood nothing, empty space. But the breathing came from that emptiness, deep and wrong and hungry. I fired both barrels. The sound echoed across the field. Snow fell from the trees at the edge of my property. When the echoes died, there was silence. No breathing, no scraping, just the wind. I closed the door, relocked it, reloaded the shotgun. The power came back on. Heat rushed from the vents. Outside, the snow fell softly, covering the strange tracks. I didn't sleep. When the sun rose, I went outside to check the damage. The trail was still there, despite the fresh snow. A single continuous track, starting at the forest, leading to my house, then circling it 7 times. Perfect circles, like something had been dragged around and around my home. I followed the trail to where it emerged from the woods. It led to a clearing I'd never seen before. A perfect circle of bare ground, 50 feet across. No snow, no grass, just frozen earth. In the center of the circle lay a single shotgun shell, the one I'd fired last night. I sold the farm a week later, moved to the city, found an apartment on the 10th floor, far from any fields or forests. But last night I woke at 3:17 a.m. A familiar sound drifted up from the street below. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. I looked out my window. 10 stories down, a trail appeared in the fresh snow covering the sidewalk. A wide, continuous track, like something being dragged. The trail circled my building once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped, right below my window. 3 taps on the glass. I didn't look up, didn't move, just listened to that deep, wrong breathing on the other side of the window. 10 stories up. The temperature dropped. Frost spread across the glass. The window handle began to turn. I grabbed my phone. Still no signal. The handle turned further. Ice crystals formed in the air. My breath came out white. Then I heard it. That wet, sliding sound. Like meat on ice. Moving up the outside wall of my building. Getting closer. The window handle clicked. I ran for the door. Behind me, the window swung open. Snow swirled into my 10th floor apartment, and something breathed in the darkness. I didn't stop running until I reached the subway station. Took the first train anywhere, changed lines 3 times. Finally ended up in a 24-hour diner in a part of the city I didn't know. The morning news reported a strange phenomenon. Perfect circles of tracks in the snow around buildings across the city. Police said it was probably vandals. They didn't mention the breathing, or the frost, or the way the tracks appeared by themselves in fresh snow. I've been moving ever since, never staying in one place more than a few days. Always above the 3rd floor, always in buildings with security, but it doesn't matter. Every night at 3:17 a.m., I wake to that sound. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. And no matter how high up I am, no matter how secure the building, I hear the breathing outside my window, feel the temperature drop, watch frost spread across the glass. 3 taps, always 3 taps. I've stopped looking outside, stopped checking the snow for tracks, stopped counting how many times it circles whatever building I'm in. But I know it's getting closer. Each night, the breathing is louder. The frost spreads faster. The temperature drops lower. Soon, I'll run out of places to run, out of buildings to hide in. And when that happens, I'll hear that wet, sliding sound one last time. Then nothing but the wrong breathing in the darkness, and the endless scraping of something being dragged through the snow. The snow fell so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead. My windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the endless white. The highway stretched empty in both directions, my headlights the only break in the darkness. I'd been driving for 6 hours, 3 more to go before I reached my sister's place. The radio had stopped working an hour ago, giving up on finding signals in this empty stretch of road. That's when I first saw the figure. A dark shape walking along the shoulder, head down against the storm. A person, definitely a person, trudging through snow that reached their knees. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Nobody should be out here, not in this weather, not at this hour. I slowed down, pulled alongside them, rolled down my passenger window. Need a ride? No response. The figure kept walking, steady pace, head down. I pulled forward, trying to get a better look, but when I checked my mirrors, the shoulder was empty. Just untouched snow where the figure had been. My stomach clenched. I pressed the gas, eager to put distance between myself and whatever I'd just seen. A mile down the road, I saw it again. The same figure, same steady walk, same position on the shoulder. I blinked hard, checked my speed, checked the time. Everything normal. But that figure couldn't be here. Not unless they'd somehow moved ahead of my car going 60 miles per hour. I drove past without stopping this time. Kept my eyes forward, but I couldn't help checking the rearview mirror. The figure was gone again, 5 miles later, they reappeared, still walking, still in exactly the same position, like a video clip playing on repeat. My hands were sweating now, despite the cold air leaking through my car's old heating system. I pressed the gas harder, 70 miles per hour, 80. The figure kept pace. Every few miles they'd appear on the shoulder, always walking, always the same. I tried counting the appearances. 1, 2, 3. By the 7th time, my teeth were chattering, not from cold. On the 10th appearance, I caught a glimpse of their face as I sped past. They were smiling. I reached for my phone, no signal. The snow fell harder, reducing visibility to mere feet. The figure appeared again, closer to the road this time, still smiling. I pushed the car to 90, hands shaking on the wheel. The engine whined in protest. When I checked the rearview mirror, my heart stopped. The figure sat in my back seat, still smiling. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded on the snow-covered road, spun once, twice, came to rest facing the wrong direction. The back seat was empty. I sat there, engine idling, breath coming in short gasps. Sweat froze on my forehead. Through the swirling snow, I saw them, standing in the middle of the road, not walking now, just watching, smiling that same unchanging smile. I threw the car into drive, spun the wheel, had to get out of here, had to get away. The figure appeared in front of the car. I swerved. They appeared on the shoulder. I swerved again. Every turn, every stretch of road, there they were, walking, smiling, getting closer. The gas gauge blinked empty. The engine coughed. I pulled over at a rest stop, had to find a phone, had to call for help. The small building was dark, locked. A sign on the door read, "Closed for winter." When I turned around, they stood at the edge of the parking lot. Snow swirled around them, but their clothes didn't move in the wind. I ran back to the car. The key wouldn't turn. The engine was dead. They walked toward me, slow, steady, smiling. I abandoned the car, ran into the woods beside the rest stop. Branches whipped my face. Snow soaked through my shoes. After 10 minutes of running, I stopped, listened. Nothing but wind. I turned in a circle trying to get my bearings. Trees looked the same in every direction. A branch snapped behind me. They stood there, 10 feet away, not walking now, just watching, always smiling. I ran again, deeper into the woods, until my legs gave out and I collapsed in the snow. When I looked up, I was back at the rest stop. They waited by my car, as if they'd known I'd end up here. The smile was wider now. I closed my eyes, opened them. They were gone. My car started on the first try. I drove straight through to my sister's house, didn't stop once, didn't look in the rearview mirror. She asked why I was shaking, why my clothes were soaked, why I kept staring out her window at the snow. I didn't tell her, couldn't tell her. But that night, I woke to footsteps outside my room. When I looked out the window, they stood in the yard, looking up, smiling. I've moved 6 times since then, changed cars, changed jobs, changed my name. But every time it snows, I see them, walking on the shoulder of whatever road I'm driving, sitting in my back seat, standing in my yard. Last week, I found something in my mailbox, a photograph, black and white, dated 1954, a highway in winter, a car pulled over on the shoulder, and behind it, a figure walking through the snow. They were smiling, the same smile I see every time it snows, the same smile that follows me no matter where I go. Tomorrow, they're predicting the biggest snowstorm in years. I can already hear footsteps outside my door, still walking, still smiling, coming closer with every step. The same figure, the same road, the same smile, forever walking through the endless snow. And I know someday they'll stop walking. Someday they'll reach me. And then I'll understand why they're smiling, The rental house looked perfect in the falling snow. 2 stories of rustic wood and stone nestled in the mountains. Just the place for our family's first Christmas away from home. My wife Jenny unlocked the front door while I carried our bags in from the car. The kids ran ahead, excited to explore, but we all stopped in the entryway. The dining room table was already set for dinner. Fine china gleamed under crystal glasses, a red and green tablecloth draped to the floor, pine garland wound between silver candlesticks. "Did the rental company do this?" Jenny asked, running her finger along the polished wood. I checked my phone. Nothing in the listing about a welcome dinner. The table was set for 8, our family of 4 plus 4 empty places. The plates held full portions of turkey, stuffing, roasted vegetables. Steam rose from the food. "It's still hot," my daughter Emma said, touching one of the plates. I walked to the kitchen. No dishes in the sink, no pans on the stove, just spotless counters and empty cabinets. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. "Maybe it's a Christmas surprise," my son Jack suggested, "like those fancy hotels." Jenny called the rental company. No answer. Just voicemail saying they were closed for the holidays. "Well," she said after a moment, "it would be a shame to let it go to waste." The food was delicious, perfect temperature, perfectly seasoned. We sat at one end of the table, leaving the other 4 places empty. That's when we heard the first footstep upstairs. A slow, heavy tread across the ceiling, then another, and another. "Probably the house settling," I said, but my hand shook as I lifted my fork. More footsteps, moving from room to room above us, then the sound of chairs scraping across floorboards, like people sitting down to dinner. Laughter drifted down the stairs. Multiple voices, speaking too quietly to make out words. Emma grabbed my arm. "Dad, there's someone up there." I stood up. "I'll check it out." The stairs creaked under my feet. Each step carried me closer to the voices, the laughter. The upper floor was empty, every room dark and cold, untouched since we arrived. But the voices continued. Now they seemed to come from downstairs. I ran back down, stopped at the bottom of the stairs. 4 people sat at the empty end of our table. An older couple, a young man, a girl about Emma's age. They wore old-fashioned clothes. Their edges seemed blurry, like a photograph out of focus. They were eating dinner, laughing, talking, but their voices sounded distant, underwater. They didn't look at us, didn't seem to notice us at all. My family huddled in the living room doorway. Jenny held the kids behind her. "We need to leave," she whispered. I nodded, turned toward the front door. It was locked. The key wouldn't turn. The laughter grew louder, the voices clearer. "Lovely dinner," the older woman said. Her voice echoed strangely, just like last Christmas. "And the Christmas before," the young man added. "And the one before that," the girl said. They turned to look at us. Their faces were wrong, too pale, too still, like masks made of wax. "Won't you join us?" the older man asked. "There's always room for more at our table," Emma screamed. The figures flickered like bad television reception. The lights went out. In the darkness, chairs scraped across the floor. Footsteps approached us. I found my phone, turned on the flashlight. The dining room was empty, the table cleared and bare. No tablecloth, no dishes, no food. The power came back on. Outside, snow fell silently. We grabbed our bags and ran. The front door opened easily now. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. Lights shone in every window. Figures moved behind the glass. The same 4 shapes sitting down to dinner again. We found a hotel in town, called the rental company the next morning. "That house isn't in our listings," the agent said. "Hasn't been for 50 years. Not since the Marshall family disappeared on Christmas Eve, 1973. Disappeared. Family of 4. The police found dinner on the table, still warm, but no sign of the Marshalls. The house has been empty ever since. I hung up, looked out the hotel window at the snowy mountains. That night, our phones all rang at exactly midnight. When we answered, we heard distant laughter, the clink of glasses, the scrape of chairs, and a voice echoing as if from very far away. "Won't you join us for dinner?" The next day, a package arrived at the hotel. Inside was a photograph, black and white, yellowed with age. 4 people sat at a dining room table I recognized, the Marshalls, according to the note on the back, dated Christmas Eve, 1973. They smiled at the camera with wax-like faces. Behind them, barely visible in the background, stood 4 more figures, our family. The photo burned easily in the hotel fireplace. We drove home that day, avoiding the mountain roads. But every Christmas since then, our doorbell rings at midnight. When we look outside, no one's there. Just snowy footprints leading to and from our door. And our dining room table is always set for 8. The food is always hot, steam rising from perfect portions on fine china plates. Laughter echoes from empty rooms. Chairs scrape across the floor by themselves. And somewhere, in a house in the mountains, 4 figures sit down to Christmas dinner, still waiting for us to join them, still dining in that endless moment between one Christmas and the next, still setting places at their table, waiting, always waiting, for dinner guests who will never leave. My daughter Sarah built it on a Sunday afternoon. The snow was perfect, wet and heavy, perfect for packing. She worked for hours, rolling bigger and bigger snowballs until they stood taller than her. "Help me with the head, Daddy," she called. The top sphere was almost as big as she was. Together we lifted it into place. Sarah's mittens had soaked through, her nose red from the cold, but she insisted on finishing. Added sticks for arms, stones for eyes, a carrot from the kitchen for the nose, my old scarf around its neck. The snowman stood 8 feet tall, the biggest one she'd ever made. Sarah beamed with pride as we took pictures. "Can we leave the porch light on?" she asked. "So he won't be lonely at night?" I agreed, didn't think anything of it. The next morning something was different. The snowman had turned, just slightly, but enough to notice. It faced our house now, those stone eyes aligned perfectly with Sarah's bedroom window. "Did you move it?" I asked my wife Anne over breakfast. She shook her head. "How would I move something that big?" I examined the snow around its base. No footprints, no sign of disturbance, just a perfect circle of compressed snow where it stood. That night, I heard scratching at the windows, like ice against glass. When I checked, frost patterns covered the panes, intricate swirls that looked almost like handprints. The snowman watched the house. Those stone eyes reflected the porch light. In the morning, it had moved again, closer to the house now. The arms, made of thick branches, had shifted position. One pointed directly at Sarah's window. "He's coming to visit," Sarah said excitedly at breakfast. My coffee cup froze in midair. "What do you mean?" "He told me, in my dreams." I kept Sarah home from school that day, called a neighbor with a truck to help me destroy the snowman. But when we tried to knock it down, our tools passed through empty air. The snowman stood untouched, solid as stone. That night, the temperature dropped to 0. The scratching at the windows grew louder. The frost patterns spread, covering every pane of glass. I sat up watching. Around midnight, I saw it move. The head turned first, slow, deliberate, the stone eyes fixed on me. Then the body twisted, snow grinding against snow. One branch arm reached toward the house. I blinked. It stood motionless again, but closer, maybe a foot closer than before. The next morning, footprints marked the snow. Small, child-sized prints that led from the snowman to our door. They ended at Sarah's window, but the snowman hadn't moved, still stood in the yard, watching. "He visits me every night," Sarah told me over cereal. "We play games. He says soon I can come outside and play forever." I called a landscaping company, asked them to bring heat lamps, rock salt, anything to melt snow. They arrived that afternoon, set up industrial heaters around the snowman. The snow didn't melt. The heat lamps flickered and died. The workers' trucks wouldn't start. That night, the scratching started as soon as the sun set. Frost covered the windows so thick I had to scrape it off to see outside. The snowman stood beneath Sarah's window, one branch arm pressed against the glass. I heard Sarah giggling in her room. When I opened her door, the window stood open. Snow swirled in, coating her empty bed. Footprints led from her window to the snowman. 2 sets, one child-sized, one much larger. I ran outside. The snowman stood in its original position, Sarah's window now closed. But it had changed. The stone eyes glowed faintly. The branch arms curled like fingers. The scarf rippled in a wind I couldn't feel. Sarah sat in her bed, covered in snow, laughing. "He just wanted to play, Daddy. He's lonely." I moved her to my room, boarded up her window, turned up the heat as high as it would go. The scratching grew louder that night. Frost crept under the doors, around the window frames, through every crack. I heard it moving, snow crunching under impossible feet, branches scraping against walls. Sarah slept soundly. Snow dusted her pillow. In the morning, the snowman had grown, 10 feet tall now. The stone eyes had multiplied, covering its head like a crown of watching darkness. The branch arms had split and twisted, forming dozens of reaching fingers. My old scarf had frozen solid, crackling like broken glass when the wind blew. I packed our bags, told Anne we were leaving. The car wouldn't start. The phones had no signal. The power flickered and died. That night the scratching came from inside the walls. Frost covered every surface in the house. Our breath froze in the air. Sarah's bed was empty again. I found her in the yard, standing in front of the snowman. Its branch arms curled around her like a cage. "Sarah!" I ran toward her. The snowman moved, fast, fluid. Snow and ice shifting like living flesh. It stood between us, 15 feet tall now. The stone eyes blazed. The branch arms reached for me. Sarah's voice came from somewhere inside it. "He just wants a friend, Daddy. He's been alone so long." I felt the cold grab me, pull me forward. The branch arms wrapped around my chest. The stone eyes filled my vision. In their depths, I saw other figures, other children, other parents, all playing in endless snow, all smiling with frozen faces. I woke up in the hospital. Severe hypothermia, the doctor said. Lucky to be alive. Sarah was fine, didn't remember anything, said she'd slept through the night. The snowman was gone when we returned home, melted in the spring thaw, leaving only a circle of dead grass. But every winter I find frost patterns on Sarah's window, hear scratching in the walls, and sometimes, when it snows, I see footprints in the yard. 2 sets, one child-sized, one much larger, leading away into the darkness, leading to where he waits, still growing, still watching, still lonely. The snowman stands in our yard again this winter. Sarah built it yesterday, 8 feet tall, stone eyes, branch arms, my old scarf around its neck. It watches the house, waiting. We found the store 3 days before Christmas. Sarah and I had been wandering the side streets downtown, looking for last-minute gifts. The snow was falling heavily, coating the cobblestones and making the old buildings look like postcards. "There's something down that alley," Sarah said, pointing between two brick buildings. A faint glow came from around the corner. The alley wasn't on any maps I knew. Narrow, with old stone walls rising 3 stories on either side. Fresh snow muffled our footsteps as we turned the corner. The shop window glowed warm yellow against the gathering dusk. No name on the storefront, just a display of old toys and Christmas decorations. The kind my grandmother would have had as a child. Tin soldiers with chipped paint, delicate glass ornaments covered in a layer of dust, a teddy bear with worn fur and one missing eye. "It looks closed," I said. But when Sarah tried the door, it opened with a soft chime of bells. The interior hit me with a wave of memories I didn't have. Wooden shelves reached the ceiling, packed with vintage items. Clothing from every decade of the last century hung on brass racks. Christmas decorations filled every corner, not the bright plastic ones from department stores, but old ones, faded, well-loved. An elderly woman sat behind the counter, writing in a large leather-bound book. She didn't look up when we entered. "Just browsing," Sarah said. No response from the woman, just the scratch of her pen on paper. We split up to explore. The store seemed bigger inside than its external dimensions would allow. Aisles twisted and turned, leading to new sections that couldn't possibly fit in the small storefront. I found myself in a toy section, metal cars with rust spots, dolls with porcelain faces and cloth bodies, their dresses yellowed with age. A rocking horse that looked exactly like the one in my grandfather's attic. Then I saw the train set. It sat on a table at eye level, tracks laid out in a complex pattern. The locomotive was scratched and dented, its black paint worn away in places. 5 passenger cars trailed behind it, each one detailed with tiny curtains in the windows and miniature people sitting inside. My father had told me about a train set just like this, his most prized possession as a child, destroyed in a house fire before I was born. I'd never seen it, but I knew every detail from his stories. This wasn't just similar, it was identical, down to the scratch on the 3rd car's roof where he'd dropped it on Christmas morning, 1962. My hands shook as I picked up the locomotive, turned it over. There, scratched into the metal base in a child's handwriting, Jimmy Clark, Christmas 1962. My father's name, his handwriting. I put the train down carefully, backed away from the display. Sarah's voice came from another aisle. "Hey, come look at this." She stood in front of a rack of winter coats. In her hands was a red wool peacoat with black buttons, the exact coat she'd been describing wanting for months. "It's perfect," she said. "And look at the price tag, only $20. The coat looked new, but the price tag was yellow with age. The style was vintage, but the fabric showed no wear. Sarah tried it on. Perfect fit. "There's something in the pocket," she said, reaching in. She pulled out a photograph. My stomach dropped. The photo showed Sarah and me standing in front of a Christmas tree. We were both wearing the clothes we had on right now, but the photo was faded, the edges yellowed, like it had been taken decades ago. I looked at other items in the store more carefully now. A baseball glove exactly like the one I'd lost in 3rd grade. A necklace identical to the one my mother always said her grandmother had given her before she died. Every item seemed connected to someone's memory, someone's wish, someone's loss. Sarah was still admiring the coat in a full-length mirror, but something was wrong with her reflection. The Sarah in the mirror wore the coat, but she looked older, much older. Her hair was gray, her face lined with wrinkles. I blinked. The reflection returned to normal. "We should go," I said. "But the coat—" "Leave it." The woman at the counter was still writing in her book. As we passed, I glanced at the pages. Names and dates filled the yellowed paper. Today's date appeared multiple times, and there, at the bottom of the page, Sarah Clark, red wool coat, December 22nd, 2024. The date was right, but the ink looked decades old. We hurried out into the snow. The alley seemed darker now, the walls closer together. "Wait," Sarah said. "I changed my mind about the coat." She turned back to the store. The window was dark, empty, no displays, no lights, just dirty glass and a sign that read, "For lease, contact City Properties." "But it was just—" Sarah touched the door. Her hand came away covered in dust. We went back the next day in daylight. The alley was exactly where we remembered, but it led to a dead end. No store, no door, no windows. The city records office had no listing for a shop at that address. The building plans showed solid brick walls where we'd seen the storefront. A week later, Sarah got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was the red wool coat and another photograph. This one showed us standing in the alley in front of a blank brick wall. Sarah wore the coat. We both looked much older in the picture. The edges were yellow with age. The date stamp on the back read, December 22nd, 1984. Sarah wanted to keep the coat, said it was just a strange coincidence, but I made her return it, wrapped it in brown paper, and left it in the alley where the store had been. The package was gone the next morning. No footprints in the fresh snow showed who had taken it. We tried to forget about the store, focused on normal things, jobs, bills, planning our wedding. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the soft chime of bells, and when I look out our bedroom window, I see a faint yellow glow coming from the direction of downtown. Sarah sees it too. The glow reflects in her eyes as she stares into the darkness. Her hand drifts to her neck, where she now wears an old necklace, one that looks exactly like my mother's grandmother's. She won't tell me where she got it. Last week, I found a new toy train set under our Christmas tree. Perfect condition, vintage. The locomotive has a scratch on the bottom. Jimmy Clark, Christmas 1962. Sarah says she didn't put it there. The store appears in different places now, never where it was before, always in narrow alleys filled with snow, always full of things we've lost or wished for or remembered. The woman still sits at the counter, writing in her book, still doesn't look up, still records names and dates in ink that looks decades old before it dries. We don't go in anymore, don't buy anything. But sometimes I catch Sarah looking at that red coat hanging in our closet, the one she swears she never went back for, the one that somehow found its way home. And sometimes, when I walk past the train set displayed on our mantel, I see tiny movements in the passenger car windows. Miniature people shifting in their seats, waiting to reach a destination they've been traveling toward for 60 years. The store is out there somewhere tonight, hidden in a snowy alley, its windows glowing with warm yellow light, waiting for someone else to find it, to see their memories on display, to buy back pieces of their past, not understanding the price they'll pay in future years. But we know better now, know to hurry past those hidden alleys, to ignore the soft chime of bells, to leave the past where it belongs, gathering dust behind windows that appear and disappear like snow melting in the sun. Even if sometimes, on cold winter nights, we still see that yellow glow, still feel the pull of things we've lost, still wonder what other memories sit on those endless shelves, waiting to be found and bought and lived again. The store of Christmas past is always open, always waiting, always writing names in its ancient book. But some prices are too high, even for the perfect gift. The clock was just sitting there in the snow. I almost missed it. A brass pocket watch, half buried in the ice at 15,000 feet. No one comes up here in winter. No one should be able to survive at this altitude in these temperatures. But there it was. I dug it out with my gloved hands. The metal was ice cold against my palms, even through the thermal protection. The face was clouded with frost, but intact, not rusted, not damaged. Just stopped at 3:15 a.m. I'm an experienced climber, 20 years on the mountains. I know better than to mess with strange objects I find at these altitudes. The cold and low oxygen can make you see things, make you do stupid things, but I couldn't leave it there. Something about that brass case gleaming in the snow, something about how clean it looked, like it had just been dropped. My base camp was set up in a small plateau about 300 feet below. A single tent, reinforced against the brutal winter winds. Standard Arctic gear, satellite phone, emergency beacon, everything by the book. I was doing a solo winter ascent, something I'd done dozens of times before. Nothing unusual about this expedition. Until the clock. I checked my own watch. 2:47 p.m. The sun would set in a few hours. I secured the found clock in my jacket pocket and started the careful descent back to camp. The wind was picking up, temperature dropping fast. By the time I reached my tent, the thermometer showed 40 degrees Celsius. Inside the relative warmth of my shelter, I pulled out the clock again. The frost had melted, leaving droplets on the glass face. I wiped it clean. 3:15 a.m. I wound it carefully. The mechanism felt smooth, well maintained. The second hand started moving with a steady tick. I set it to the correct time. 5:23 p.m. now. Placed it on my equipment box. Made dinner. Dehydrated meals taste like cardboard, but you need the calories up here. I checked the clock again before getting into my sleeping bag. Still running. 8:49 p.m. The wind howled outside. Nothing unusual about that. You get used to the sounds up here. The flapping of the tent fabric, the whistle of air through rocks, the creaking of ice. Normal sounds. I fell asleep quickly. The exhaustion of high-altitude climbing is like nothing else. I woke up suddenly. Something had changed. The wind had stopped. Complete silence. My LED lantern cast a weak glow through the tent. I checked my watch. 3:14 a.m. The first knock came exactly 1 minute later, a sharp rap against the tent wall, like knuckles on a door. I froze. At this altitude in winter, there couldn't be anyone else. Mountain rescue doesn't fly in these conditions. No climbers attempt this route in winter. I was alone on this mountain. Had to be alone. Another knock, same rhythm, same spot. I turned off my lantern. Darkness pressed against my eyes. The knocking continued, steady, patient, like someone waiting to be let in. I reached for the clock. The brass was warm to the touch. The hands pointed to 3:15 a.m., exactly 3:15 a.m. I tried to wind it forward. The mechanism wouldn't move, stuck at 3:15 a.m. The knocking stopped after exactly 10 minutes. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When the sun rose, I checked outside the tent. The snow was undisturbed. No footprints. No marks where someone had knocked. Just smooth, wind-blown powder. I spent the day checking my oxygen levels, testing my cognitive functions. High altitude can cause hallucinations, but my numbers were normal. I was thinking clearly. The clock sat on my equipment box, still showing 3:15 a.m. I wound it again, set it to the correct time. Watched it tick normally for a few hours before stopping again at 3:15 a.m. The second night I was ready, camera set up, voice recorder running, extra batteries for my lantern. The wind picked up around midnight, regular storm patterns, nothing unusual. Until 3:14 a.m. The silence fell like a blanket, 1 minute of complete stillness. Then the knocking started again, same spot on the tent wall, same rhythm. I forced myself to count, 1 knock every 3 seconds. The camera showed nothing on its screen. The voice recorder picked up only static. I tried talking. "Who's there?" My voice sounded thin in the freezing air. No response, just the steady knocking. I unzipped the tent flap an inch. Wind-driven snow stung my face. Nothing but darkness outside. The knocking continued on the opposite wall now. Impossible for someone to move that quickly without leaving tracks. 10 minutes again. Then silence. I waited until dawn before looking outside. Fresh snow had fallen, but there were tracks now. A single line of footprints circling the tent. They started nowhere and ended nowhere, just appeared and disappeared in the middle of unbroken snow. I measured them. Size 12 boot prints. Old-style mountaineering boots, the kind no one uses anymore. The tread pattern looked familiar. I checked my old climbing photos that night, found what I was looking for in an expedition shot from 15 years ago. John Keller, experienced climber, disappeared on this same route during a winter attempt. They never found his body. He wore size 12 boots, the same tread pattern as the prints outside my tent. The clock sat on my box. 3:15 a.m. I picked it up, turned it over. There was an inscription on the back I hadn't noticed before. Faint letters, almost worn away. JK, time waits for no one. The third night, I didn't pretend to sleep. Sat up in my sleeping bag watching the clock, listening to the wind. 3:14 a.m. came. The silence fell. The knocking started. This time I heard something else. Between the knocks, a voice, muffled by the tent wall, calling my name. It sounded like John. We'd climbed together years ago before his last expedition, before he vanished into a winter storm at 15,000 feet. The knocking moved around the tent. Faster now. The voice grew clearer. "Let me in. It's cold out here. So cold. Let me in." I sat perfectly still, watched the clock. 10 minutes. That's all it ever lasted. Just had to wait it out. The voice got closer to my head, right on the other side of the thin tent wall. "You know what it's like. The cold. The silence. Let me in." When the 10 minutes ended, I was shaking. Not from the cold. The clock still showed 3:15 a.m. I packed my gear at first light, left the clock where I found it, half buried in the snow at 15,000 feet. Some things should stay lost in the ice. I wrote this report during my descent, the facts as I experienced them. No embellishments, no explanations, just what happened over those 3 nights at high altitude. The clock is still up there, still showing 3:15 a.m., still waiting. Here's what I know for certain. The clock was real. I held it. The footprints were real. I measured them. The voice was real. I recorded it, even if the recording only captured static. Everything else, the meaning of it all, why it happened, what wanted to be let in, that's not for me to say. I've been asked why I didn't stay longer. Try to solve the mystery. Document more evidence. My answer is simple. 20 years of mountain climbing teaches you one thing above all others. Respect the warnings. When the mountain tells you it's time to leave, you leave. The clock is still there, still showing 3:15 a.m., still waiting for the next climber to find it, to wind it up, to hear the knocking, to listen to what waits outside in the cold and dark. But it won't be me. Some mysteries should stay buried in the ice. Final note. I checked the weather records after my descent. The temperature at 15,000 feet on those 3 nights, never rose above 40 degrees. No human could have survived outside for 10 minutes in those conditions. No human could have left those footprints in the snow. No human could have knocked on my tent wall at exactly 3:15 a.m. But something did. The GPS died first. Then our phones lost signal. We were 4 hours into what should have been a 3-hour drive when the snow started falling. Heavy, thick, the kind that swallows headlight beams. We were 4 friends in my old Subaru. Me driving, Mark navigating, Sarah and Tom in the back. The heating worked overtime against the February cold. Empty coffee cups littered the center console. A weekend ski trip turning into something else entirely. "There's a turn coming up," Mark said, squinting at the paper map we'd bought at the last gas station. "Should be a state route. Might get us back to the main highway." I slowed down. The wipers fought against the snow. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The turn appeared suddenly, an unmarked road cutting into dark woods. I took it carefully, tires crunching on fresh snow. 5 minutes later, we saw the first lights through the trees, yellow squares floating in the darkness, windows, a lot of them. "There's a town here?" Sarah leaned forward between the seats. "It's not on the map." She was right. The map showed nothing but forest for miles. But as we drove closer, more lights appeared. Streets, buildings, a whole village nestled in the snow. I pulled into what looked like the main street. Old-style buildings lined both sides. 2 stories, mostly wood and brick. Every window was lit up bright, warm light spilling onto the snow. But something was off. "Where are the cars?" Tom asked. "The people?" The street was empty. No vehicles, no footprints in the fresh snow. Just lights in every window. Like the whole place was waiting for something. I parked in front of what looked like a general store. The engine ticked as it cooled. Snow fell silently outside. Nobody moved on the sidewalks. No shadows passed behind the lit windows. "We should ask for directions," I said. "Maybe find somewhere to wait out the storm." The store's front door was unlocked. A bell chimed when we walked in. The lights were on. Shelves stocked with food, supplies, everything you'd expect. But no cashier, no customers, just us and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. "Hello?" Mark called out. His voice echoed slightly. No response. We checked the back room. Empty. The office. Empty. A coffee pot sat half full on a warmer, still hot. Like someone had just stepped out moments ago. "This is wrong," Sarah said. "We should go." We went back outside. The snow was falling faster now. The street looked longer somehow. More buildings than I remembered seeing when we drove in. "Let's try another place," I said. "Someone has to be around." We tried the diner next door. Same thing. Lights on, tables set, coffee steaming in cups. No people. The bank across the street. Empty. The post office. Empty. Every building unlocked. Every light burning bright. No one home. "We need to leave," Tom said. "Now." We got back in the car. I turned the key. The engine started, then died. Tried again. Nothing. The battery was fine, but it wouldn't catch. "We'll have to walk," Mark said. "The main road can't be far." We grabbed our emergency supplies from the trunk. Flashlights, water, energy bars. Started walking the way we'd come in. The snow made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. 10 minutes of walking. The village should have ended, should have seen trees. But there were just more streets, more lit windows, more empty buildings. "This isn't right," Sarah said. "We're going in circles." We weren't. The buildings were different. But there were more of them now. The village was growing somehow, expanding in the darkness. We tried another direction, same thing. More streets appeared in the snow, more lights. The village seemed to spread out endlessly in every direction. Our phones still showed no signal. The screens displayed the same time, 11:47 p.m. They hadn't changed since we entered the village. We picked a house at random, tried to hole up for the night. The furniture was solid, real. The heat worked, but something felt wrong about the place. The photos on the walls showed nothing but blurry shapes. The books on the shelves were blank inside. The TV only played static. None of us slept. We sat in the living room watching the snow through the windows. Sometime around what felt like 3 a.m. we heard it. Music, distant, old-fashioned, like a music box playing somewhere in the village. "Don't!" Sarah grabbed my arm when I moved toward the door. "Don't go out there." The music got louder, clearer, a simple melody repeating over and over, then voices, children laughing, the sound of running feet in the snow. But when we looked outside, the street was empty. We stayed in that house until the sky started to lighten. The snow had stopped. The village looked different in the gray dawn light, smaller somehow. The endless streets had shrunk back. "Now," I said. "We go now." We ran, past the empty buildings, past the dark windows. The village seemed to be folding in on itself as the sun rose. Streets disappeared behind us. Buildings faded into the trees. We found the main road. It had been there all along, just 100 yards from where we'd stopped. Our tracks from the night before were still visible in the snow, leading nowhere. I looked back one last time. There was nothing there. No village, no lights, just unbroken forest and fresh snow. We walked 3 miles to the next real town. Called a tow truck for my car. When they went to get it, there was no sign of the village, no roads leading into the woods. The car sat in a small clearing, covered in snow, battery dead. The local sheriff had no record of a village in that area. The historical society had nothing. No maps showed any settlement there, new or old. But here's the thing. We all took pictures. Our phones worked that much at least. But when we checked later, the photos showed nothing but snow and trees, except for one. The last picture on my phone, taken just before sunrise. You can see a street, buildings, lit windows, and in one window, if you zoom in close, there's a face, watching us, smiling. The authorities don't believe us. 4 people sharing the same hallucination, they say. Snow blindness, fatigue, mass hysteria. They have plenty of explanations, but they weren't there. They didn't see how the village grew in the darkness, didn't hear the music or the laughter, didn't feel how wrong it all was. We've tried to find it again. Drove that road dozens of times. Nothing, just woods and snow. The village is gone, or waiting, or both. I still have that photo on my phone. Sometimes late at night, I look at that face in the window. It's clearer now than it was before, like it's coming into focus, like it's getting closer. And sometimes, when it snows, I think I hear music, a simple melody, repeating over and over, like a music box playing somewhere in the dark. But I don't go looking for it anymore. Some places don't want to be found again. Some places should stay lost in the snow. Mark moved to Arizona after that night. Sarah won't drive in snow anymore. Tom doesn't talk about it at all. But we know what we saw, what we experienced. The village was real. The lights were real. The emptiness was real. Everything else, why it appeared, what it wanted, where it went, that's just speculation. But I'll tell you this. Check your GPS carefully on snowy nights. If it dies suddenly, if you see lights through the trees where no town should be, don't stop. Don't turn off the main road. Some villages only exist in darkness. and some of them want to keep you. The electric tea maker was basic, just a cheap model from the camping store. Heat water, add tea, drink. Simple. That's what made it all wrong. Simple things shouldn't do impossible things. I'd been hiking all day in the snow, 6 miles through dense forest to my grandfather's old cabin. No electricity except for the solar panels. No running water except what you bring. Just wood walls, a tin roof, and silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The tea maker sat on the counter where I'd left it last summer. Dusty, unplugged. I wiped it down, filled it with bottled water. The solar batteries had enough charge. Just wanted something hot before bed. The water boiled. I added the tea bag. Earl Grey. Steam rose in the cold air. The cabin was barely above freezing, even with the wood stove going. Outside, snow fell steadily. The weather report had promised a storm. I drank the tea at the wooden table, watching darkness gather outside the windows. The cup warmed my hands, basic comfort after a long day. When I finished, I unplugged the machine. Basic safety in an old cabin. The first noise woke me at 2 a.m., a click, then humming, the sound of heating elements warming up. I knew that sound, the tea maker. I got up slowly. The cabin was dark except for moonlight on snow through the windows. The tea maker sat on the counter, silent, unplugged. I checked the plug, still disconnected. Checked the solar battery indicators, all off. No power flowing anywhere in the cabin except the emergency light in the bathroom. Back to bed, probably dreaming. The wind picked up outside. Snow hit the windows in waves. The second noise came at 3 a.m., bubbling, water boiling, steam hissing. I sat up in bed. The tea maker hummed on the counter. A cup sat beneath it. Steam rose in the moonlight. I didn't move. Watched the steam curl up. Watched hot water drip through into the cup. Smelled Earl Grey. The machine clicked off. Silence again. Just wind and snow. I got up, approached the counter slowly. The cup was hot to the touch, full of fresh tea. Earl Grey, still steeping. I dumped it in the sink. Checked the machine's water reservoir. Empty, bone dry. No tea bags in the basket. But it had made tea. Impossible tea from nothing. I unplugged it again. Took the plug completely out of the solar battery outlet. Wrapped the cord around the base. Placed it in a cabinet. Closed the door. Sleep came eventually. Snow fell harder. Wind rattled the windows. 4 a.m. Steam hissing. Water boiling. The tea maker sat on the counter again. Not in the cabinet where I'd left it. A fresh cup beneath it. Steam rising. My hands shook as I approached. The cup was ceramic, blue with white flowers. I didn't own cups like that. Hadn't brought any cups at all. Just my metal camping mug. The tea smelled stronger this time. Perfect Earl Grey. Hot liquid swirled in the cup. I didn't touch it. I picked up the machine, threw it outside into a snowbank, watched it sink into white powder. Locked the door, all the windows. 5 a.m., steam, hissing, bubbling. The machine back on the counter. 2 cups now, both blue ceramic with white flowers, both steaming, both full of tea. The machine wasn't wet, no snow on it, no sign it had ever been outside. The power cord lay neatly coiled, still unplugged. I sat at the table, watched the steam rise from both cups. The cabin grew colder, my breath frosted in the air, then footsteps, light ones, on the wooden floor behind me. I didn't turn around, couldn't turn around. A hand reached past me, pale, thin, picked up one of the cups. I heard sipping, satisfied, sighing. "Thank you for making tea," a voice said, my grandmother's voice. She'd been dead for 10 years. I ran, out into the snow, no coat, no boots, just blind panic through the storm. When I looked back, light glowed in the cabin windows. 2 figures sat at the table. Steam rose from their cups. I walked 3 miles through the blizzard to the nearest neighbor. They found me half frozen on their porch at dawn. The rescue team checked the cabin later that day, found it locked, untouched. The tea maker sat on the counter, unplugged, no cups, no signs anyone had been there. But the machine was warm, and it smelled like Earl Grey. I sold the cabin a month later, left everything inside, including the tea maker. The new owners complained about it once, said it made tea at night, even when unplugged, used cups they didn't own. I told them to leave it alone, let it make its tea. Some machines serve more than the living. The new owners moved out after 2 weeks. The cabin's been empty since then, but hikers passing by at night say they see lights through the windows, steam on the glass. 2 figures sitting at a table, drinking tea from blue cups with white flowers. I've never gone back, never bought another electric tea maker. Stick to kettle and stove now. Simple things that stay simple. But sometimes, late at night, I smell Earl Grey, hear the click of a machine turning on, steam hissing, and I wonder if they're still there, my grandparents, sharing midnight tea in a snowy cabin. I could go back, sit with them, share a cup of impossible tea. But I won't. Dead things should stay dead, even if they make good tea. The machine is still there, still making tea each night, still serving guests who leave no footprints in the snow. The real estate agent can't sell the cabin now. Says it smells too strongly of Earl Grey. Last week I got a package, small, brown paper, no return address. Inside was a blue ceramic cup with white flowers, still warm, smelling of fresh tea. I packed it away in the basement. Some gifts you don't accept, some invitations you don't answer. But every night at 2 a.m. I hear it. Click, hum, steam, the sound of tea being made. And sometimes, if I listen carefully, I hear them too. Quiet conversation, gentle laughter, the clink of cups. They're patient. They'll wait. The tea will stay hot. The cups will stay full. But I won't go back. Won't sit at that table again. Won't drink from those cups. Some machines should stay unplugged. Some tea should stay undrunk. I was 12 when I saw it fall. The snow was heavy that night, big flakes dropping straight down in the yellow light from my bedroom window. No wind, just silence and snow. The star cut through the clouds at 9:47 p.m. I remember checking my clock. It wasn't like normal shooting stars. Those are quick, white, gone in a second. This one moved slower, left a blue trail across the sky, and it fell close, really close. I saw it drop behind Miller's Woods, maybe half a mile from my house. Mom was asleep. Dad was working late. I put on my winter coat, boots, 2 pairs of socks, gloves, the whole setup, grabbed my flashlight, the good one with new batteries. The snow was up to my knees in places. I pushed through it, following the glow. There was still light coming from the woods, a soft blue pulse, like a heartbeat. Miller's Woods isn't big. Maybe 20 acres of pine trees the old man Miller refused to sell to developers. He died last spring. The woods stayed empty, until tonight. The glow led me to a small clearing. Snow had stopped falling directly above it, like something was holding it back. In the center, half buried in white powder, sat a chunk of ice the size of a basketball. But it wasn't normal ice. It glowed from inside, blue light pulsing slowly, and it was warm. I could feel the heat from 10 feet away. The snow around it had melted in a perfect circle. I stepped closer. The ice was clear, completely clear, like glass. But something moved inside it. Shadows swirled in its depths, dark shapes that twisted and changed. My flashlight beam passed through it, cast shadows on the snow. They didn't match the ice, didn't match anything. They moved on their own. I reached out to touch it. The surface was hot, not warm, hot, like a stove burner, but it didn't melt, didn't even drip water. That's when I noticed the other shadows, not in the ice, not from the ice, real shadows on the snow around me, standing shadows, human-shaped, but no one was there to cast them. They moved when I moved my flashlight, shifted and changed position, always staying just at the edge of the light, always facing the ice. I ran, straight home through the snow, up to my room, looked out the window at the woods. The blue glow pulsed between the trees. Mom checked on me at midnight, asked why my boots were wet. I told her I'd played in the snow before bed. She didn't question it. Parents don't question small lies. They save that for the big ones. I watched the woods all night. The shadows came out, tall ones, short ones. They moved through the snow around the blue light. No footprints, just darkness sliding over white. By morning, the snow had stopped. I went back to the clearing. The ice was still there, still warm, still glowing. More shadows now, dozens of them, standing in a circle around it. They scattered when I got close, slid away across the snow like oil on water. I took pictures with my phone. They didn't show the shadows, just the ice, just the glow. That night they came closer to my house. I saw them from my window, shadow figures sliding across the snow in our backyard, moving faster now, more purposeful. The ice's glow got weaker each day. The shadows got darker, stronger. They started leaving marks in the snow, not footprints, just dark spots where they stood, like burns on the white surface. Day 4. The shadows reached my window, pressed against the glass. I could see details now, faces, arms, legs, all made of darkness, all wanting in. Day 5. The ice stopped glowing, turned black inside. The shadows covered our house at night. Mom and Dad didn't see them, didn't feel the cold they brought, the way they sucked heat from the rooms they touched. Day 6. I went back to the woods. The ice was gone, just a dark circle in the snow where it had been. The shadows followed me home, closer now, almost touching. They're still here. The ice is gone, but they stayed. They live in the dark spaces now, under beds, behind doors, in closets, waiting. They want something. I don't know what, but they watch me, follow me. Their touches leave cold spots on my skin, like frostbite, like death. I see them most clearly in winter, when snow covers the ground, black shapes sliding over white. They've grown, changed. Some are as tall as trees now, others small as children. They don't stay in Miller's Woods anymore. People report them all over town, dark figures in the snow, cold spots in their homes, the feeling of being watched. The police came yesterday, asked about the missing kids, 3 of them now. All disappeared at night. All lived near the woods. They found small dark spots in the snow outside their windows, like burns, like shadow footprints. I haven't told anyone about the ice, about that first night. Who would believe me? A star that fell as ice, ice that brought shadows, shadows that hunt. But the shadows know I saw them first, know I watched them birth from that strange ice. They cluster thicker around my house than anywhere else, press harder against my windows at night. They'll get in eventually. Ice melts. Locks break, windows crack, and shadows. Shadows can squeeze through anything. I keep my flashlight close now, fresh batteries every day. The shadows hate light, slide away from bright beams, but batteries die, bulbs break, and there's more darkness than light in the world. The shadows are patient, they can wait, they have time, and they're spreading. Last week my little sister said she saw them, dark shapes in her room at night, cold touches on her face while she slept. Mom sent her to a therapist, but I know. I see how the shadows follow her now, too, how they reach for her with dark fingers, how they whisper her name in voices like winter wind. I should have left the ice alone that night, should have stayed in bed, should have let it melt or freeze or whatever strange stars do when they fall to earth. But I didn't. I touched it, woke it, released what was inside. Now the shadows are loose, growing, hungry, and they remember who set them free. First tracks appeared at mile marker 23, just a single line in the snow beside my car, clean, sharp, like something heavy had been dragged through the fresh powder. I was driving home from my late shift at the hospital. 2 a.m., rural Route 16. Nothing but snow and darkness for 30 miles. My headlights caught the tracks as they curved onto the road from the tree line. Sleigh tracks, had to be. Wide runners cutting clean lines through 6 inches of fresh snow. But no hoof prints, no animal tracks of any kind, just 2 parallel lines appearing from nowhere. I kept driving, kept my eyes on the road. The snow was falling harder now, big flakes catching in my headlight beams. The tracks stayed beside my car, perfectly parallel to my tire marks. Mile marker 24. The tracks crossed over to the other side of the road, a smooth curve right through my lane. I slowed down, watching them disappear into the darkness beyond my lights. The sound started then. Bells, clear and sharp through the falling snow, like sleigh bells, but slower, deeper, a steady rhythm coming from somewhere behind my car. I checked my rearview mirror, nothing but swirling snow in my taillights. The bells got louder, closer. Mile marker 25. The tracks crossed back over, fast this time, a sharp cut right through my tire tracks. The bells were right outside my window now, but still nothing in my mirrors, nothing beside me, just tracks appearing in the fresh snow as if something invisible was making them. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder. The temperature gauge on my dashboard dropped suddenly. 30 degrees, 20, 10, below zero. The windows frosted over in seconds. The bells stopped. Complete silence except for my engine and the soft crunch of snow under my tires. I kept driving. What else could I do? Middle of nowhere, no cell service, just me and whatever was making those tracks. Mile marker 26. The tracks disappeared, just ended in the middle of the road. I slowed down, looking for where they went. Nothing, like whatever made them had simply lifted off the ground. Then the bells again, above me now, on the roof of my car, a slow, heavy jingling, like something had landed up there. Weight pressed down on my roof. The car dipped with it, hundreds of pounds of pressure. I heard wood creaking, metal groaning, ice crackling across my windshield. I didn't stop, didn't slow down, kept my foot steady on the gas as frost patterns spread across all my windows. The pressure increased. The roof began to buckle inward. Mile marker 27. The weight lifted suddenly. The bells moved ahead of me. In the last clear spot on my windshield, I saw new tracks appearing in the snow, right in front of my car. Whatever it was leading me now. The tracks weaved back and forth across the road. I followed them. Had to. They were the only thing I could see clearly through the frost on my windows. Left, right, left again, dancing across the asphalt like it was playing some kind of game. My headlights caught something ahead, a shape in the falling snow, large, dark, moving fast. But when I blinked, it was gone. Just tracks appearing in the white powder. Mile marker 28. The tracks split. 2 sets now, one on either side of my car. Perfect parallel lines guiding me forward. The bells surrounded me, a chorus of deep rhythmic chiming that made my teeth vibrate. The temperature inside my car dropped lower. My breath came out in thick clouds. Ice formed on my skin. My fingers stiffened on the steering wheel. I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Dark shapes pacing my car on both sides, just outside my headlight beams, running at 40 miles per hour through deep snow without making a sound. Mile marker 29. The tracks converged suddenly. Both sets crossed in front of me. I slammed on my brakes. The car slid sideways in the snow. Time slowed down. Through my frosted windshield, I saw it clearly for the first time. A sleigh, ancient wood stained almost black, runners polished to a mirror shine, but no horses, no reindeer, nothing pulling it. It hung in the air in front of my sliding car. Bells rang from empty harnesses that swayed in a wind I couldn't feel. Dark shapes moved around it, pulling at leather straps that connected to nothing. My car spun, once, twice. The sleigh stayed perfectly still, floating 3 feet above the road. As I rotated past it, I saw inside. Empty seats, empty driver's bench, but frost patterns formed on the wood. Handprints appearing in the ice. Something was there, something I couldn't see. The car stopped spinning, faced forward again. The sleigh was gone. The bells faded. The temperature began to rise. Mile marker 30. My windows cleared. The frost melted. Everything back to normal. Just a snowy road and my headlights cutting through the dark. I drove the last 10 miles home in silence, parked in my driveway, sat there for a long time, engine running, watching snow fall. In the morning, I checked my car. The roof was dented. 4 deep impressions in the metal, like something heavy had landed there. The dents were ringed with frost, perfect circles of ice that wouldn't melt, even in direct sunlight. I drove back out to that stretch of road. Broad daylight. Fresh snow had fallen. No tracks. No signs of my car's slide. Nothing to prove what had happened. But here's the thing about mile markers 23 through 30 on rural Route 16. They don't exist. Never have. The markers jump from 22 to 31. Always have, according to county records. 7 miles of road that officially don't exist. I've driven that route every night shift since then. 3 years now. Never seen the tracks again. Never heard the bells. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when snow is falling thick, my temperature gauge drops suddenly. Ice patterns spread across my windows. And in my rearview mirror, just for a moment, I see tracks appearing in the snow behind me. I keep driving when that happens. Keep my eyes forward. Some things you don't look at directly. Some things you don't acknowledge. But I know it's still out there. That empty sleigh with its invisible passengers, running its route on roads that don't exist, marking paths through snow that never shows its tracks in daylight. Last week they found a car abandoned on that stretch of highway. Driver's door open, engine running, fresh tracks in the snow beside it, 2 parallel lines leading off into the woods. They never found the driver, but they did find something in the car, on the roof. 4 circular dents ringed with frost that wouldn't melt, and a single sleigh bell, black with age, hanging from the rearview mirror. It's still ringing, even in the police evidence locker. A slow, deep chime that sounds like winter, like darkness, like something running through the snow on roads that aren't there. Melody started on my third night alone in the mountain cabin. A distant tune carried on the wind, high and clear, like a music box playing somewhere in the dark. I'd moved to the cabin after my husband died, sold our city house, bought this place with the insurance money. 10 acres of forest, no neighbors for miles, just me and the mountains and the wind that never stopped blowing. The first 2 nights were silent except for that wind, constant, rushing through pine trees, rattling the windows, normal mountain sounds. But the third night was different. I was reading by the fireplace when I heard it, a melody rising and falling with the gusts, sweet and simple, like a lullaby played on tiny chimes. I checked outside, stepped onto the porch into bitter cold. The melody got clearer, seemed to come from the north side of the property, where the forest grew thicker. No one lived in that direction, just wilderness for 20 miles until the next town. The music had to be the wind, had to be trees creaking or ice cracking or my mind playing tricks. I went back inside, turned up the radio to drown it out, but the melody cut through every song, every commercial, weaving between the words like it was trying to tell me something. The fourth night, it got louder, strong enough to hear clearly over the wind. A simple tune repeated over and over, 8 notes up, 8 notes down, like someone turning a music box handle at a steady pace. I recorded it on my phone, played it back. Nothing but wind static. Tried again with better equipment. Same result. The melody existed only in the air, only in the moment. Fifth night, the temperature dropped to -20. Wind howled around the cabin. The melody turned into a song. Words in a language I didn't know, sung by what sounded like children's voices. I called the previous owner, asked if he'd ever heard music in the wind. He laughed, said mountain wind plays tricks, said I'd get used to it. But his voice shook when he talked about the north side of the property. Sixth night, I followed the song, bundled up in my warmest clothes, took a flashlight and emergency beacon. The melody pulled me deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker, branches heavy with ice. My flashlight beam caught strange patterns in the frost, letters or symbols frozen into the bark. The song got louder with each step, the wind colder. Ice crackled under my boots, formed on my clothes even as I walked. I found the tree after an hour of walking, bigger than the others, ancient. Its trunk was split down the middle, hollow inside. Ice coated every branch, every twig. Perfect, clear ice like glass. Something hung in the highest branches, metal gleaming dully in my flashlight beam. An old bell covered in frost patterns that matched the symbols on the trees. The song poured from that bell, pure and clear and impossible. No wind reached inside the forest here, but the bell swayed gently, ringing out that simple melody over and over. I stood under it, snow falling around me in perfect silence. The bell turned slowly, showing faint engravings under the ice, old words in some script I didn't recognize. Children laughed behind me, high, clear laughter mixing with the song. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through empty air. More laughter, closer, the sound of small feet crunching in snow. But no footprints appeared. No children emerged from the darkness. The bell rang louder. The melody became a chorus of voices, singing words that made my head spin, made the air shimmer with cold light. I ran, stumbled through the snow away from that tree, away from the voices and the bell and the impossible song. But it followed me. The melody stayed in my head, played over and over, 8 notes up, 8 notes down, never stopping, never changing. I didn't sleep that night, sat by the fire with all the lights on. The song drifted through my walls, through my closed windows, through my hands pressed against my ears. Seventh night, I went back, had to understand, had to know what was singing in my forest. The bell hung exactly as before, ice-covered, swaying without wind. But this time I brought a ladder. This time I climbed up. The bell was old, ancient, bronze turned green with age. The engravings were clearer up close, pictures carved into the metal, children dancing in a circle, trees with symbols in their bark, a bell hanging in branches. I reached out to touch it. The ice was warm under my gloved fingers, warm and pulsing like something alive. The bell rang once, loud and deep, not the high, clear tone I'd been hearing. This was a funeral bell, a warning bell. The children laughed again. Right behind me on the ladder, small hands touched my back, pushed. I fell, hit snow that shouldn't have been soft enough to save me. Lay there looking up at the bell gleaming in my dropped flashlight's beam. Small faces peered down from the branches, pale, smiling, translucent as ice. They waved with hands that cast no shadows. I didn't run this time, asked them what they wanted, why they sang, why they led me here. They answered in that strange language, words like icicles breaking, like winter wind through dead trees. But somehow I understood. They were lost. Long ago, followed a song into these woods, found a bell that promised to lead them home, but the bell trapped them instead, froze them between winter and spring, between lost and found. Now they sing to bring others, ring their bell in the wind, hope that someone will break their curse, free them from their endless winter. I climb the ladder again, touch the bell again, feel that living ice under my fingers. The children whisper instructions, how to break the ice, how to end their song, how to set them free. I hesitate, ask what happens then, what becomes of them, of me. They laugh. The bell rings. The world goes white with snow. I wake up in my bed, sunrise through my windows. The wind is silent for the first time since I moved here. The bell hangs on my porch now, clear of ice, silent. The children don't sing anymore, don't laugh in the darkness. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when wind blows from the north, I hear it. 8 notes up, 8 notes down, a simple melody played on tiny chimes. And sometimes, in the frost on my windows, I see their faces, smiling, free, moving on to wherever lost children go when their songs are finally heard. First letter arrived on a Tuesday. Temperature was -15. Roads hadn't been plowed in 3 days. No mail truck could have made it up our mountain road. But there it was in our mailbox, a white envelope covered in frost. My wife Sarah found it while checking for the newspaper delivery that never came. The envelope was stiff with ice, no return address, no postmark, just our names written in sharp black letters, Thomas and Sarah Winters. "It's completely frozen," Sarah said, turning it over in her gloved hands, like it's been sitting in a freezer. We brought it inside, let it thaw on the kitchen counter. The paper was expensive, heavy stock that held its shape even after the ice melted, the kind you use for wedding invitations or legal documents. Sarah opened it with a letter opener, a single sheet inside, the same heavy paper, the same sharp black writing. The letter knew things, private things. It described our morning routine in perfect detail, how I always burnt my first cup of coffee, how Sarah hummed while brushing her teeth. Small details only someone living in our house would know. It ended with a simple line, "The snow is getting deeper." We checked the house, every room, every closet, called the police. They couldn't make it up the mountain. Said to lock our doors, stay inside, wait for the roads to clear. The second letter came the next morning. The mailbox was frozen shut. Had to pour hot water over the hinges. Inside, another white envelope. More ice. More frost patterns crawling across expensive paper. This one knew more. Knew about the fight we'd had the night before. Quoted our exact words. Described how Sarah slept on the couch. How I lay awake until dawn. It ended. Sarah Winters, tomorrow. Just that. Her name and tomorrow. Nothing else. We packed bags, tried to leave, but the car wouldn't start. The engine was frozen solid. Mechanics couldn't come up. Roads still blocked. We were stuck. Sarah saw the footprints first, leading from the woods to our mailbox. Single line of tracks in the deep snow. But they stopped at the box. Didn't lead away. Just ended. Like whoever made them had vanished. The third letter waited in the frozen mailbox Wednesday morning. More ice. More frost. More secrets spilled across expensive paper. It described Sarah's childhood. Details she'd never told anyone. The time she broke her arm falling from a tree. The name of her first pet. The color of her bedroom walls when she was 10. It ended, Sarah Winters, tonight. We boarded the windows, locked every door, piled furniture against the entrances, called everyone we knew. No one could reach us. The storm had cut off the mountain. The temperature dropped lower. Pipes froze. Heater struggled. Ice formed on the inside of our windows. Frost patterns that looked like words. Sarah saw them first. Faces in the frost, watching us from every window, pressing against the glass, leaving handprints in the ice. The fourth letter arrived at midnight. We heard the mailbox open and close, metal hinges creaking in the cold. I wouldn't let Sarah check it. Went myself. Trudged through waist-deep snow. The envelope was warm this time, the only warm thing for miles. Inside, a photograph. Sarah sleeping on our couch the night before, but wrong somehow. Her skin too pale, her breath not fogging in the cold air. The letter with it said, "She's ours now." I ran back to the house. Sarah was gone. The couch where she'd been sitting was covered in frost, her coffee cup frozen solid. Steam turned to ice crystals in midair. New footprints led from the couch to the front door. Single line of tracks in fresh snow, stopping suddenly, like the ones by the mailbox. The fifth letter came at dawn. The mailbox was rimmed with ice. The envelope burned cold against my fingers. A single line inside. Check your basement. The basement door was frozen shut. Had to break it down. Cold air rushed up the stairs. Colder than outside. Colder than anything natural. Sarah sat in the corner. Frost covered her clothes. Ice crystals in her hair. Her skin pale as snow. She smiled when she saw me. Her teeth were made of ice. "The letters were right," she said. Her voice crackled like breaking icicles. "The snow is getting deeper." She stood up. Frost spread from her feet across the floor. The air turned white with snow that fell upward. I ran, locked the door, called the police again. They finally made it up the mountain that afternoon. Found me huddled by the fireplace. Hypothermia, they said. Hallucinations from the cold. They searched the house. No Sarah, no footprints, no letters. The mailbox was empty, unfrozen, normal. But they found something in the basement, a patch of floor where nothing would melt, where frost formed no matter how much heat they applied. And in the frost, words written in Sarah's handwriting. "The snow is getting deeper." They're still looking for her. 3 months now. The weather's warmed up. Snow's mostly gone. But our mailbox freezes shut every morning. New letters come. Different handwriting now. Sarah's handwriting. Telling me about where she is, what she's become. How the cold changes you, reshapes you, makes you part of its endless winter. She wants me to join her. Says there's room in the frost for both of us. Says the snow is getting deeper every day. The police don't believe me. Say I killed her, hid the body. Say the letters are my guilty conscience playing tricks. But they can't explain the ice. Can't explain how our mailbox freezes in summer heat. Can't explain the footprints that appear in morning dew. Single line of tracks that end suddenly. Like something walked out of winter into nothing. Sarah's last letter came yesterday. The paper was warm again. Her words simple and clear. I'm coming home. The temperature's dropping now. Frost spreading across my windows, faces pressing against the glass, watching, waiting, smiling with teeth made of ice. The snow is getting deeper, and Sarah's footprints lead to our front door. The storm hit us at mile marker 47. 1 minute we were driving through light snow, the next we couldn't see 10 feet ahead. My wife Emma gripped the dashboard. Our kids, Ben and Alice, stopped arguing in the back seat. The car slid slightly on black ice. There's a motel ahead, Emma said, checking her phone. The Blue Pine, 3 miles. The signal died as she spoke. All our phones went dark at the same moment. The car radio crackled and went silent. Just static. I slowed to 20 miles per hour. The headlights barely cut through the snow. White flakes swirled so thick they looked solid. The temperature gauge on the dashboard dropped rapidly. 30 degrees, 20, 10. The motel appeared suddenly through the white wall. A long single-story building with maybe 20 rooms. Old neon sign flickering weakly. Empty parking lot except for one maintenance truck. I pulled in carefully. The snow stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. Complete stillness. No wind. No sound at all. That's weird, Ben said from the back seat. He was 13, always noticing things. Look at the snow in the air. He was right. The snowflakes hung suspended, completely motionless. Like time had frozen. We got out of the car. The air felt wrong, dense, heavy. Our footsteps made no sound in the fresh snow. The silence pressed against my ears like physical pressure. The motel office was empty. Bell on the desk, guest book open. Coffee half drunk and still steaming in a mug. No one in sight. I rang the bell. The sound died instantly, like something swallowed it. Hello? My voice fell flat. No echo, no resonance. A key lay on the desk. Room 13. Handwritten note beside it. Take it. Last one. The room was basic. 2 queen beds. Old TV. Heater rumbling under the window. Normal except for the silence. Complete absence of sound. Emma tried the TV. Static on every channel. Just snow and white noise. I don't like it, Alice said. She was 10, usually brave. Now she pressed against Emma's side. It feels wrong. We heard it then. First sound since the storm hit. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Heavy. Walking past our door. I opened it quickly. Empty corridor stretching both directions. No footprints in the thin carpet. The footsteps continued. Clear now. Coming from the ceiling. Someone walking in a room that shouldn't exist above us. Single-story motel. Alice started crying. No sound came out. Her mouth moved. Tears fell. Complete silence. The temperature dropped lower. Our breath frosted in the air. Ice formed on the windows. Perfect geometric patterns. Not random. Organized. Like writing in a language I couldn't read. Ben pointed at the far wall. The door wasn't there before. He was right again. A new door had appeared. Dark wood, old brass handle, frost spreading from its edges. Emma grabbed the kids, pulled them behind her. I approached the door slowly. It swung open before I touched it. Cold air rushed out. A corridor stretched beyond. Impossible corridor. The motel ended just outside our window. But this hallway went on for what looked like hundreds of feet. More footsteps, above, below, all around us now. The walls rippled like water. "We need to leave," Emma said. Her voice sounded distant, underwater. We grabbed our bags, ran for the car. The parking lot had changed. Longer now. The office was further away. Our car sat at the far end, barely visible through strange mist that hugged the ground. The suspended snowflakes had moved, formed patterns in the air, faces watching us with hollow eyes. The maintenance truck was gone. In its place, different vehicles appeared and disappeared. Old cars, new cars, cars that hadn't been built yet, flickering in and out of existence. We reached our car. The key wouldn't work. The lock had changed, become something complex and alien. More doors appeared in the motel walls, dozens of them, opening and closing by themselves, each one showing a different corridor, different rooms, different versions of the same space. The silence grew thicker, heavier, started taking shape in the air. Dark forms moving through the mist, human shapes walking without touching the ground. Ben screamed. Sound came back in a rush. All at once, every footstep, every door, every voice that had been swallowed by the silence. Overwhelming noise, then quiet again, but different now, natural quiet. Wind returned. Snow fell normally. Our car door opened easily. Keys worked. Engine started. We drove, fast. Nobody spoke until the motel disappeared in the rearview mirror. "Look," Alice said finally. She held out her phone. It was working again. Showed 3 a.m. We'd checked in at 8 p.m., spent maybe 20 minutes in that room. "Dad," Ben's voice shook slightly. "The doors. I counted them when they appeared. 13 new doors, always 13. Emma checked the map when we got signal again. Found the spot where the motel should be. Empty lot. Had been empty for 30 years. Old motel burned down in 1987. 13 people died. We drove all night, found a different hotel near the state line. Normal place, normal sounds, normal doors that stayed where they should be. But something followed us. The silence comes back sometimes, usually at 3 a.m. The air gets heavy, sound dies. Ice forms on our windows in those same geometric patterns. Ben sees the doors, says they appear in his room at night. 13 of them, opening onto corridors that can't exist. Alice doesn't speak anymore, not since that night. Doctors can't explain it. Tests show nothing wrong. She just chooses silence now. Emma hears the footsteps, above our bed, every night at 3 a.m. We live in a single-story house. I see the faces in snowfall, watching, waiting. Their mouths move in patterns that match the frost writing on our windows. The motel is still there, not on any map, not in any record, but people find it, always during storms. Always when the snow gets too thick to drive through. Local police have reports, dozens of them. Cars found abandoned in empty lots. Personal belongings scattered in snow. No bodies, just footprints that lead to blank walls. And silence, deep silence that swallows sound. Last week, Ben drew a picture. 13 doors in a circle. In the center, words in geometric patterns. Same patterns as the frost on our windows that night. Alice looked at it and spoke. First time in months. Said one word in a voice like winter wind. "Soon." The snow is falling tonight. Thick flakes that hang motionless in our headlights. The air grows heavy, dense with silence. And somewhere in that whiteness, 13 doors are opening. I noticed it first. The mannequin in the Christmas display had turned its head, just slightly, an inch to the left of where we'd positioned it the night before. I'd been dressing store windows at Marshall's department store for 12 years. Mannequins don't move by themselves. They have joints that lock, screws that hold positions. This one had turned its head. "Someone's messing with us," Mike said when I showed him. He was head of security, checked the overnight cameras. Nothing. No one had entered the store. No one had touched the display. The mannequin was old, probably from the 1950s. Found it in the basement storage last week. Different from our modern ones. More detailed. Almost lifelike. Perfect for our vintage Christmas display. That night, I stayed late. Watched the store empty. Lights dim. The mannequin stood in the window, posed with an old-style Christmas gift box. Head turned slightly left. At 10:47 p.m. it moved, quick, smooth, head turning right, looking directly at me through the display glass. No sounds, no mechanics, just movement. I checked the joints, locked tight. No loose screws, no explanation. The security cameras caught it, clear footage of independent movement. Mike watched it 30 times, called in maintenance. They found nothing wrong, nothing to explain it. The next morning the mannequin had moved again, both arms slightly raised, fingers spread, like it was reaching for the glass. Customers started noticing, taking pictures. The mannequin appeared in their photos, but wrong. In every shot, it was in a different position than what people saw in the window. Mrs. Chen showed me her phone, picture of her daughter in front of the display. The mannequin stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, but there was no hand in the real display. The arms were still raised. More photos emerged online. The mannequin in the background of tourist shots, family pictures, selfies taken nowhere near our store, always the same figure, always watching. A week before Christmas, the snow started, heavy, constant. The streets emptied. Store stayed open late for holiday shoppers. I found footprints that night, real footprints in the snow outside the display window, small, precise, leading away from the store. But the mannequin still stood in its pose, still reached for the glass. Mike checked the basement storage, found records from 1954, a special order mannequin, custom-made, modeled after a real person. A girl who went missing that same year, never found. The photos got worse. The mannequin appeared closer in each one, more detailed, more alive. Its painted-on smile grew wider. Its glass eyes reflected light they shouldn't reflect. 3 days before Christmas, a child went missing. Security footage showed him walking past our display window at night. The mannequin's head turned to follow him, its arms lowered, then static. When the picture cleared, both were gone. They found the boy 2 days later, safe, unharmed, couldn't remember anything. Just kept talking about a pretty doll that wanted to play. The police came, took statements, examined the mannequin, found nothing unusual, just old joints, painted features, glass eyes. But the eyes moved when they weren't looking. I saw it, followed their movements, blinked sometimes. Christmas Eve, store closed early, heavy snow falling. I stayed to finish the displays. The mannequin stood silent, watching. At midnight, it stepped off its platform, simple, smooth, like it had always been able to walk. Its joints creaked. Porcelain skin clicked with each movement. "I just want to play," it said. Voice like old music boxes, like childhood songs played too slow, like before, when I was real. I ran, through empty aisles, past dark departments. Its footsteps followed. Click, click, click on the floor. "You can't leave," it said behind me. Closer now. "No one leaves, not on Christmas." I reached the front doors, locked. Windows frozen shut, snow piled outside, no way out. It stood at the end of the aisle, smiling that painted smile, arms open like an embrace. "I'm so lonely," it said. "Stay with me, be my friend," like she was. Old newspaper clippings in the basement explained it. 1954. A girl disappeared. Last seen at Marshall's department store. Looking at a special Christmas display. A mannequin made to look just like her. They never found her body, but they found her clothes. In the basement, next to an empty mannequin stand. The mannequin walked closer, each step smooth, perfect. Its smile grew wider, split its porcelain face. "Your turn now," it said. The security cameras caught some of it. Strange footage. Me backing away, the mannequin walking, then static. Just static for 6 hours. They found me in the morning, behind the display. Cold, confused, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. No memory of the night. The mannequin was back on its stand, posed perfectly, smiling that painted smile. But something was different. A new look in its glass eyes. Satisfaction. Victory. The missing girl's sister came to the store that day. Old woman now. Looked at the mannequin for a long time. "That's not the one," she said finally. "The original was different. This one's new, recent." She touched the display glass. "This one's wearing my sister's face." The mannequin moved again that night. Security footage shows it clearly, walking through empty aisles, trying on clothes, dancing in the dark. But its face was different, because it was wearing my face now, my skin, my smile, while something that looked like me stood on its platform. Glass eyes staring, painted smile waiting. They haven't noticed yet. The other staff, customers, they don't see how still I stand, how smoothly I move, how my skin shines like porcelain in certain lights. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it walking the store. The thing that used to be me, dancing and playing and trying on clothes, wearing my face, living my life, while I stand in the window, joints locked, smile painted on, waiting for next Christmas, for the next lonely child, the next friend to play with, forever. First flash came at exactly 11:23 p.m. 3 quick pulses of light from the abandoned house across the street, white, bright, like someone signaling with a flashlight. I'd watched that house for 2 years from my home office window. No one had lived there since the Matthews family disappeared. Police never found anything. Just an empty house with dinner still warm on the table. The lights made no sense. The power had been cut off. No squatters, I would have noticed. The windows were still boarded up, except for that one second-floor window where the light pulsed. I wrote down the pattern. 3 quick flashes. Pause. Too long. Pause. 3 quick again. Basic Morse code. SOS. I called the police. They checked the house. Found nothing. No signs of entry. No lights. No power source. They said I was seeing reflections from passing cars, but there were no cars. Not at that hour. Not on our dead-end street. The lights came back the next night. Same time. 11:23 p.m. Same window. Different pattern now. Longer sequences. More complex. I recorded it. Translated the Morse code. Help trapped inside walls not dead. The police came again. Same result. Empty house. No power. No explanation. I bought a better camera. Set it up in my office. Focused on that window. The lights appeared right on schedule. The camera caught nothing. Just a dark window in a dark house. But I saw them. Clear as daylight. And now they were spelling out my name. David, watch the walls, they move. I watched through binoculars. The boards over the window looked different, warped somehow, like they were bending inward. The light pulsed between the cracks. More messages came, faster now, urgent. They took us all, house is hungry, time wrong here. Help us, David, coming for you next. The walls of the house did move, subtle shifts, boards bending, bricks realigning, like the whole structure was breathing. I stopped sleeping, watched all night. The lights got brighter, started appearing in other windows, always the same time, always spelling out warnings. My wife Sarah saw them too, started recording the messages, pages of them, warnings and pleas and descriptions of things inside the walls. The Matthews family had seen the lights too. Notes in their abandoned house proved it. Pages of recorded messages, right up until they disappeared. 1 week after the first flash, our lights started responding, without any power, without any source, flashing back to the house in patterns we didn't control. Sarah translated the messages our lights were sending. We see you. We come soon, walls open here too. The police stopped coming, said we were pulling pranks, wasting their time. But they wouldn't look at the videos, wouldn't read the messages. The house changed at night, grew larger, walls stretching upward, windows multiplying, all of them flashing now, hundreds of lights pulsing in complex patterns. Our house started changing too, walls bending inward, doors opening to rooms that shouldn't exist, lights flashing conversations we couldn't control. Sarah disappeared first. I heard her scream from the bathroom, found the door locked. When I broke it down, the room was empty, just flashing lights spelling out, "She's with us now in the walls waiting for you." I tried to leave. Every door led back inside. Every window showed the house across the street, growing, changing, pulsing with light. The walls breathed now, actually breathed, plaster rippling like skin, light seeping through cracks that spelled words, "Come join us, David," all together here in the walls in the light. Sarah's voice called from inside the walls, the Matthews family too, and others, so many others, all calling, all trapped in places between rooms, between moments. The lights came faster, brighter, messages blending together. No escape home now with us forever. The walls opened, just peeled apart, showing spaces that shouldn't exist. Corridors made of light and shadow, and faces. So many faces pressed against impossible windows. I saw Sarah there, smiling, waving, her skin glowing with inner light, the Matthews family beside her, everyone the house had taken, all changed, all bright, all waiting. My last message is this: don't watch the lights, don't read their signals, don't let them into your home, because they're spreading, house to house, street to street, converting spaces into something else, something hungry. The walls move now, the lights pulse, and we are changing. I see the truth in these spaces between rooms, these angles that shouldn't exist, these corridors of light. Time is different here, space bends, walls breathe, and we become light. Sarah is calling again, her voice pure energy now. The walls are opening. It's 11:23 p.m. The lights are so bright.